I thought I was
Ooh.
feeling better on I don't know, Sunday, and then I felt
Yeah.
and then I like fell apart on Monday. Like I was just like I started waking up and I was just like, oh my God. And then I don't know. Anyway, but I'm feeling better.
Oh, good. Good,
Well,
good, good.
our own defense on Sunday, you were like, I feel better. I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to
I had
start
a
this
lot to catch.
project. I'm going to start blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
Yeah, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that.
I had a lot of catching up to do, but
mhm.
I'm still under the weather, so I gave myself the excuse not to get out of my jammies. So
Good,
I'm
good. There's no need to get, you know, worked up about failing tasks. It's fine.
I'm already on top. That's party.
The life of a viral poem.
We're back, and
We are
ready.
back.
One second.
I don't even know what the fuck day it is anymore. I'm just so lost in my life.
How's it going for you?
Good. So we are in like full holiday festivities mode. So Lydia has decorated like the inside and the outside, and we usually do like one kind of little family trip during December. So we went to Great Wolf Lodge. We did the indoor water park thing.
Fun.
Yeah, in the middle of winter, which is great. It was so warm and toasty in so many places. And there's like a outdoor hot tub, so it was chilly outside, but then we're in the hot tub, and like it was so much fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I was just lying in bed, with an ice pack on my head while you were riding the water slides. I see.
I know our paths, like two roads, diverged in the woods for us. I am geared up for this. I feel like
I am too.
we took a little break, and then we almost got back, and then we had some stuff come up, but now we're back. So welcome to Table for Deuce, where we shoot the shit about all things lit. With me, as always, is Kate Hanson Foster. And because it's been a while, I totally have blanked out again on doing a roasty bio. Sadly, I mean, I feel like you were already got roasted by life itself, and we're enduring like an
Oh, that's
entire family sickness. So I let the universe roast you last week. We'll just call it even.
That's true. That's true. Thank you for that. You're such a good friend. Meanwhile, Michael. Meanwhile, I was roasting you all morning. Let's get to your books, right? Michael Schmeltzer is the author of Empire of Surrender. Good Christmas present, or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa, if you want to share poetry with friends. When Michael isn't writing, though, he can be found participating in the current OnlyFans challenge, which is naked Christmas tree wrestling. I am a subscriber.
Oh, oh my gosh, those needles, they're never good.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. It's worth it to keep my fans happy.
Right. Got to pay the bill somehow.
That's right, because poetry is not doing it.
Last episode, we were talking about timely versus timeless poetry, and that sort of led to what poems might stand the test of time. So you suggested Good Bones, because that was
So
yeah.
it was. So every now and then we're going to look at viral poems and poems that went viral or went mainstream or whatnot, whatever you want to say, but poems that became widely shared for whatever reason, and see, since we were having that discussion on timely versus timeless poems, whether these poems are going to be a product of a certain time period or zeitgeist, or if they will be able to stand the test of time and see their way through generations and see if it holds up after the initial sort of impact of the poem. So the first poem we're going to be looking at is Good Bones by Maggie Smith, which came out back in 2016 originally, and then has been widely shared in that initial period, and also makes a resurgence I feel like I see it every
Okay.
3 to 4 months, 3 to 6 months. It'll come back, someone will share, and it'll kind of circulate again. So we're gonna check it out with some fresh eyes, if you will, and see how it goes. So I'm going to read Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about Good Bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. Good Bones by Maggie Smith. So I will start, and I'm gonna use a different sort of a lens to kind of look at this. I think one of the things that a viral poem has going for it is that there is a certain kind of simplicity to it, that you can read it and you get it, and there's that sort of instant recognition, I guess you could say. So this poem, there isn't anything in it that requires me to go outside of the poem per se. Like everything that I need is right there in this poem, and the emotions in it kind of feel just easily accessible. I feel like whether or not you are a parent, whether or not you have kids or little kids around you, or you're a teacher, whatever you may be, I feel like there are things in this poem that are going to make sense, especially the world is at least 50% terrible. I feel like all of us kind of get that sense at times. So I think there's that instant recognition that comes from a viral poem. This definitely has that going for it. I think the title is something that we've heard enough, at least in American vernacular, that is a phrase that is also recognizable. It's not a title that requires much of us as a reader. It doesn't hold us at bay. It kind of immediately pulls us in. It's, once again, it's familiar. There's a familiarity to everything in this work. One of the things that I didn't recall when I reread it this time was I didn't remember how much repetition was in this poem.
Yeah.
There is so much repetition in this poem, and that kind of surprised me. I only remember little bits of it because it's been viral and it's gone like through different cycles. So I kind of remember bits and pieces. I remember the gist of the poem, and I remember kind of the message, and that's the thing that stuck. And that seems to be the lasting thing for me in this poem, is that I don't remember really the techniques of the poem. I don't remember the specific things per se. I just remember that kind of feeling of the poem. So I find that very interesting. Like there are certain poems where a line will stick with me. Like there are some poems that I've read that definitely haven't gone viral, but there's a line that I can remember. But with this per se, I can't exactly remember specific lines. I just remember the specific feeling of reading the poem. So it's a very different kind of experience as far as that goes. So I think that might contribute to part of that viral phenomenon as well. It's not necessarily anything that is particularly extremely well written in the sense that I can't forget a specific line, but it just so captures a very specific feeling or mood. So that is what I carry with me. So
I think you're right. The repetition in this poem, I think, does most of the heavy lifting for the reader, in the sense that every time a line is repeated, it's not repeated exactly, it's repeated just a little differently to give you, like, I think, to invite all these new perspectives, and that's what makes it so accessible to readers. So like, you know, like you said, you don't have to be a parent, I think, to get the sentiment here of the sense of despair, whether it's, because one thing that, when this poem went viral, it just happened to be published at like right after the Orlando shooting, I think, the mass shooting. And so, just like people, all the time are looking for something that speaks that inner discontent with the way things are when things feel so helpless. And I think that's why this poem gave people so much comfort during that time. And I think that it's a very specific and short, like you said, and the language is simple, but it's also still vague enough that you could sort of swap in and out your own tragedy, To speaking of things that stick with you with this poem, the one thing was shithole. That was the one thing that I remember, that this poem kind of like catches you, the like, walking through a real shithole. And it's like, it's a little bit jarring, but also kind of like, wow, it's just very bold in your face, while you're walking through a shithole, like kind of disgust with the world. And so I think that is why it has resonated so much with people. But one thing that I find like super interesting is like this poem kind of contains everything that I think your standard poet tries to avoid, like hyperbole for one. Some of these statistics that I know are meant to be metaphors in a way, but just a lot of hyperbole, a lot of indignation, melodrama. It's kind of, those are things that as a poet I try to not go too into, and this one really just really lays it on so thick, and people seem to really like that.
If you do the classic like MFA workshopping of the poem, there are things you could say that I know for a fact would get torn apart. Like, I mean, there are some very, like you said, there are a lot of abstractions that make it somewhat vague. I mean, for every loved child, a child broken, that is pretty vague. It's broken. It's just one of those abstract kind of words that doesn't really convey much beyond the word itself. It's just kind of there, and it just kind of gives the general impression of being bad. And then you do have that more specific bagged sunk in a lake, which is that very like terrific like just horror that comes out from that. But yeah, like you said, there is that sort of heightened sense of like just emotion, or like, I mean, 1,000 delicious ill-advised ways. Like, I do love the way that sounds. But I mean, there is no specifics as, okay, like, what is it? Smoking? Is it drinking? Is it, like whatever it may be, it's kind of not, it's not included. There's enough, like you said, left to the reader to imagine their own lives within this. Like, what are the ways that we are like, living deliciously, and, whatever.
Right. There's that sort of outward worldly destruction that's all, that could be happening, versus like our own vices, and how, all of us can look back to when we were young and stupid choices and things like that. And I mean, I think it's smart to leave it vague. I think that is part of why, because if this had some specific thing of like, when I got my lower back tattoo, that might, so be like, well, that doesn't really apply to me. Instead, but you can take it. And if I could say, well, my lower back tattoo, yeah, I'll keep that as long as I can from my. If we could just pivot just a little bit to talk about like the internet, and because I think that I mean, obviously has to be a part of this conversation. That's where it went viral. So like the internet. And
the internet.
We're very, we're of the generation, we have to sort of reconcile that we grew up, without computers, without internet. I mean, at least the first part of my childhood, there was no computer. I first went from a typewriter, then to word processor, then, dial-up internet. And by the time I had full-blown access to the internet, I was an adult. So so I'm sort of, torn, I think, from this. And I know you're, with your like wanting to get off social media, it's like there's this inner struggle, I think, between wanting to utilize what the internet can do for us as writers, and also this desire to go back to these like analog days. This has all of the components of, I think, a good internet poem. And I think that enough people have amplified it in a strange way that it creates a momentum of groupthink, I think, where it's like if enough people share something, then it generates a momentum that almost tricks you into thinking something is better than it is. And I think this is an excellent poem. I do like the poem. I really, really do. If there's one thing I've learned as the internet continues to progress, is that everyone has a voice and everyone deserves to have a voice. A lot of people have long overdue voices now that we otherwise would not have heard if the internet did not exist. And that is so important. And I think, over recent years, I used to be really vocal about things. Over recent years, I personally have taken a little bit of a back seat and realized that, like, you might have a voice, but other times it really is important to just listen. And so I do that a lot. A lot of the like social injustices, or things like mass shootings and stuff, like I don't necessarily always have that knee-jerk reaction to feel like I need to comment or insert my opinion on it. I realize, like, that sometimes you have to sit back and listen. So all of this is to say, I am a white woman. I am a mother, just like Maggie Smith, right? And having sat back, having been a listener more than a speaker, I would say, on social media, I read this poem with a new set of eyes, I think, maybe than I would have back in 2016, because a lot of this, kind of, I hate to say it, but reeks of white privilege. You know what I'm saying? Like, life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. Not everybody can say that. George Floyd can't say that. And a lot of other people can't keep the harsh realities of the world from their children. It just is not something that's possible. And so when I read that through that lens of like, wow, well, like that's, I guess I too am in a position where I can shield my kids from a lot, or at least, I understand the desperation of wanting to shield your children. When you brought up this poem, I did, obviously, because we're talking about viral poetry, I searched it on Twitter because that's where, viral things live. To me, after doing that, it's like Good Bones seemed to be like the white woman anthem of optimism. And this poem is not optimistic to me at all. I've read a lot of people's comments like, whenever I need comfort, I turn to this poem, like this poem gives me hope and all this stuff. And there's nothing, as far as I'm concerned, very hopeful about this poem at all, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of like, a sad pop song that has a really catchy tune to it. You kind of, you're too busy tapping your foot to realize that it's a very sad song.
The privilege portion, I mean, there is, I think it's a fairly universal feeling that parents want, or at least I would hope that parents do want to kind of shelter, protect their children in a lot of ways, want to keep certain knowledge about the world from them. I think that privilege comes in where, by doing so, there are some parents who wouldn't be endangering their children by sheltering them, and then some that would be doing more harm by sheltering them if you don't teach your children about, say, like some of the hatred out there in the world, or about how they dress or who they are, then that is going to be much more harmful than actually telling them. You know, you can shelter them for so long, but I would rather be the one to tell my kids about certain dangers out there than having some stranger who actually hates them show them what that hatred is. Like, I think that privilege is a very important point to bring up in this. And I think a lot of this poem does, I don't want to say cater out, I don't want to like imply that there's any kind of like intention behind the author's like reasoning for this, but there is that sort of sense that the audience for this poem, I don't know, would be as diverse as some of the other poems that I would like to see go viral. Let's just put it that way. I think it's a great poem on its own. Do I think it's a great poem that deserves to go viral to the extent that it did, where there's like Good Morning America type interviews, or, you know, BBC reports or whatever it may be?
It was
I
on a
don't know.
show too, wasn't it? It was on a TV show, I think, something like that. It got featured on.
Oh yeah. Some, was it like a medical or a law thing or something? And someone
I don't
read
know, I
it.
didn't see it, but I think that once you've gone viral, then there's the desire to keep that that energy flowing. And I imagine that the getting a taste of being a viral poet sort of gave birth to the Keep Moving project, which you know, is similar to Rupi Kaur. Rupi.
Sweet. Rupi K.
Rupi K.
Hey, Rupi K.
You know, but this idea of
Uh-huh.
you know, cashing in on the fact that, you know, a lot of people when they're seeking inspiration or comfort or motivation, that they're being given words that don't require like the big literary treatment that we give normally to poems, that they're, you know, they're giving something to you. There's not much work you need to do but receive. You know? And a lot of people love that. And you know, is it good poetry? To some people, yeah, like they love it. And it's, you know, is it gateway poetry? Maybe to some, you know, who are have an interest in poetry, that could open a door to you know, other works and delving deeper into the art of poetry, the craft of poetry. You know, just to go back, I will say, like, you know, that line, for every child loved, a child is bagged. You know, I feel like for every you know, white woman that loved this poem, there might be a POC poet that side-eyed it a little bit. I do love the line, I'm trying to sell them the world. Is, you know, is a very sad and unique line. But to compare the world to a shithole apartment, let's say, you know, or a house, for someone who may be living in poverty, you know, it's pretty insulting, I think, because it's just, you know, there's a disgust, you know, I think, by using the word shithole, and I get it's a metaphor, but there's, you know, to use like, you know, this sort of like, ew, like disgusting, living in a shithole, and saying like, well, we could make this place beautiful, right? And I don't know, it just reeks of privilege to me in a way that I didn't catch the first time around.
No, the word shithole, though, it is interesting. Like, I think this was because it was early 2016. I think it was before the time when Trump was talking about quote unquote shithole countries, right? So there is that word is now loaded in a different way, I think, which is interesting that you brought that up. But yeah, there are things, like I said, about this poem that are the rhythm's good, and the music and the repetition. There is a lot of poetic elements that I enjoy about it. There is a certain, I don't want to say surface quality, but there is a little bit of that too. Like I said, I don't think a poem could necessarily go viral, or a line could go viral without there being some sort of simplicity. I don't know if, I mean, poetry is not popular as an art form, generally speaking. It's not something that is aspire to here in the US, let's say, or even rewarded financially or rewarded in many ways here in the US. So I don't know if something that complicated could go viral. I think something extremely well written could go viral, but I don't think that necessarily equates as complexity. So I think some of the poems that I've been revisiting and examining some viral poetry, there is that very surface familiarity and understanding that comes with the poem. You get it immediately. And it's so familiar and comforting to know that there is someone else who thinks this or feels this or has this experience, that it really does connect. And I think that is such an amazing part of poetry itself, if you can get past some of like people's hesitancy with poems, but like with the viral poetry, it does kind of bridge that gap between the inaccessible poetry world and this image that some people may have of it versus like, oh, I get this. And I think you and I had talked about, or you had brought up kind of like the Hallmark card when it comes to like occasion poems and things like that, needing that familiar, even if it's cliche, just something that you understand and get immediately. Good Bones has that quality to it, that yeah, I could find lines like this in a card and feel comforted and want to give it to someone, and I know they will understand it and be comforted as well.
You know, I don't know if I agree entirely that the poem itself is cliche. I think that what the poem has, much like the Hallmark aisle, it is a catch-all sort of a catch-all net of it. Or, you know, as a reader, you know, readers can be very selfish. You know, you want to center yourself into the text that you're reading, and it's easy to do with this poem, I think, for a lot of people. I obviously, I can relate to this. I feel that same sentiment. Like I said, I'm a white woman, I'm a mom. I have the ability, I think, to protect my kids to a certain extent that other people don't. And I understand the fear and the despair that comes with, you know, all these bad things that happen. And I can center myself, and whether it be, you know, whatever it is that's going on in my life. And so it's a win, you know, like, and I think, you know, when we talk about timeless versus timely, the other thing that's really interesting about this is that it's vague enough, I think, that it will end up being a timeless poem because it will carry over to the next tragedy. It'll be the next, you know, sort of like reach to that people share again when they want something to give voice to that, you know, that feeling.
Okay.
There's actually a different poem I wanted to read. And so this poem's called Buen Esqueleto. It's by Natalie Scenters-Zapico. And it was published shortly after Maggie Smith's poem. Have you read this?
I have not, no.
Oh, so it was published like in BuzzFeed, and it happened shortly after, and it's a response poem to Maggie's poem. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it really quick. Life is short, and I tell this to mis hijas. Life is short, and I show them how to talk to police without opening the door, how to leave the social security number blank on the exam. I tell this to mis hijas. The world tells them I hate you every day, and I don't keep this from mis hijas because the bus driver who kicks them out onto the street for fare evasion, because I love mis hijas. I keep them from men who'd knock their heads together just to hear the chime. Life is short, and the world is terrible. I know no kind strangers in this country who aren't sisters a desert away, and I don't keep this from mis hijas. It is not my job to sell them the world, but to keep them safe in case I get deported. Our first landlord said with a bucket of bleach, the mold would come right off. He shook mis hijas, said they had good bones for hard work. Mijas, could we make this place beautiful? I tried to make this place beautiful. So
okay, real quick, I was gonna bring up this point at the end of Maggie Smith's poem about the line about any decent realtor. You know, it's this says, I am trying to sell them the world, and it's like, you can make this place beautiful, where the onus to make the world beautiful is on the kids, where this poem is taking the responsibility of, I've tried to make it beautiful, which I love, because that was going to be one of the things I wanted to kind of point out and think about more about Maggie Smith's poem, is that, you know, why isn't the responsibility on us as adults to make the place beautiful, and not trying to sell them on anything? And I think a lot about the scene with Greta Thunberg, where she's like criticizing like adults for not doing enough, or like these world leaders, like, you know, how dare you, and why and like people are like clapping and applauding and still not doing shit. And it just cracks me up. You know, it's like, congratulations, you've shared that speech or that little, you know, meme worthy moment, and like, so what now? Like, just because you applauded her as an adult doesn't mean you've done anything per se. Like, what happens next? Like, she is criticizing you for not doing enough. I don't know if clapping about that is the right response. Like, maybe you should just sit silently and feel bad. Like, I don't know. So I feel a little bit of that here at the end, where it's like, you know, I get that instinct to shelter your kids and want to keep them safe. And I just, kids in general, I feel like adults and the, you know, Congress and governments and all that just kind of shit on kids in general. And I wish everyone did everything they could to make kids feel safe and protected. But yeah, it is on the adults, and it is on us, and it is on people who have authority and power and money and all that. So you could make this place beautiful line is a little bit of a conflicting line for me.
you know, that's a really good point, though, because I mean, you could see that this poem, Maggie Smith's poem, is sort of the antithesis of so many social movements that are happening right now that are so centered on of delivering hard truths, and just the disgust and just kind of, you know, everyone's so tired of politicians and their platitudes and their, you know, their thoughts and prayers, and you know, just empty speeches and things that really do nothing. So for that, I mean, it's kind of like, well, then what does this poem achieve that's really concrete in any way? When I found you know, the poem that I just read, Buen Esqueleto, is I was just like, you know, I understand why this poem didn't go viral. It's too specific, you know, it's about immigration. Not everybody can relate, but it was, you know, a pushback to say, you know, good for you, and you're a nice little you know, oh, it's very nice, and you know, it's very much like you would hear any nice polished politician say, aside from maybe shithole. But it's like, you know, I think it's just like, you know, this is not reality. It's just not. And it might be your reality, but it's not everyone's reality. So it's fascinating to me, you know, that this went viral. There's poems that go viral that I think just make sense. And then I think there are other poems that go viral that just hit, you know, it's like right time, right place, right event, you know, all the stars aligned, and boom, you know, and there it goes. And, you know, just because you win the lottery doesn't mean you're good at making money. So it's
I need that on like a t-shirt.
This is what I would consider like winning the lottery for a poet. And I think it's, you know, it definitely was a huge springboard for her career, and good for her, you know. That's great. I don't think it's a poem that I would turn to again and again. But like I said, if we're, you know, if we want to talk about Rupi Kaur or whatever, the people who love that kind of stuff, I think that this poem might be a little bit, because it's just like a tad longer. It's not, you know, like little Insta poems or whatever, but it's not unlike a Rupi Kaur poem. It pretty much contains all of the same elements that a Rupi Kaur poem has, which is just, this idea to sort of motivate and uplift, while also, lamenting over, certain situations and stuff. And it's like, I don't know, it's like a formula, right? Like you're just taking like whatever, something that makes you feel bad, and you can craft language in a certain way that's vague and general enough that it can be easily digested by the masses. And I think that's like the claim to fame for Rupi Kaur. And I think, like I said, not to belabor the point of Maggie Smith's Keep Moving project. I don't know, because I don't know if she calls those poems or not, but I think it's more of a project. But she I think she's smart. I think she knows what people want to hear. And so she is cashing in on that after what happened with her viral poem.
Yeah, I think if the Keep Moving project came before this poem.
Oh, really?
I don't think, no, I'm saying if Keep Moving was written before Good Poems or Good Bones, I don't think Keep Moving would have necessarily became a book. I think it would have been something that stayed on Twitter and was something that Maggie Smith used as, I don't exactly recall what the catalyst was, and I don't want to get too biographical with it or kind of do anything or say anything mean-spirited in what Maggie Smith was going through when she was writing Keep Moving poems. But I think whatever she was processing during that time was great for Twitter. It was these small, short little bursts, these little lines, and I think some of them are great. I think some of them were, giant shrug. But I think it was a great thing to be able to do. It was almost like an experiment, or like you said, a project. And I think for that technology and that medium, I think it was perfect, and I think it's great. Would it have been a book if she wasn't a viral poet? I really don't think so.
Here's the thing. Okay, so to go back to social media and our own, I know that over the years, I've indirectly curated my own echo chamber of, with all of the different algorithms, all of the friends that I have, whether it's Facebook or the people I follow on Twitter or whoever follows me. I have over time curated, this chamber of my own that, and we all have, right? Maggie Smith, the Maggie Smith phenomenon is so fascinating to me because, if Good Bones and Keep Moving, that general sentiment has crossed over. She sort of toes the line between the Rupi Kaur people, the audience, and the literal like literacy poets. So what's happening, which is fascinating, is I think, while the literacy poets or the academic poets are, thumbing their nose, whatever, to Rupi Kaur, they're praising Maggie Smith because she has had this viral poem. She in the, I guess, general sense of the word, was successful in her own right before the poem went viral, right? She had other books.
She has her book. I reviewed one of her books of poetry, and I thought it was great. I thought like Maggie Smith is like undeniably a talented writer.
Yeah,
like, Maggie Smith can write a great poem.
She was in sort of that world. And now I think, she is sort of brilliantly towed the line between both, where I think someone in my echo chamber of like poetry land could be tricked into liking some of these things that I know she is kind of putting out there to pander to a different type of reader. I know there are a lot of people who can sort of, toe the line between like street poetry and academic poetry, and kind of like, that they're they're not, they're like, they didn't get their MFA, but they are working it and they're successful. Like she's doing something that I can't think of anybody else, which is being like highly respected. I don't want to go back to the privilege part of it, but like we're talking about a woman who, bragged about her 2-day turnaround acceptance to Poetry Magazine. And
and got pushed back for that, I remember.
Yes, but
people were mad.
Yeah, she is top of the heap now, like top of the heap in the poetry world. And yet, she put out a book of complete vapid cack, like a coffee table junk book, and is praised by her peers for it.
I hate the fact that a negative criticism or constructive criticism even has been so taboo that it's automatically viewed as an attack. Like I can lovingly criticize, and I think it makes for better writing.
100% jealous. If I could throw out a coffee table book, with a bunch of platitudes and get a lot of money and completely cash out of this miserable life of poetry, I would do it in a heartbeat. I think we all would. If it, like you said, I think if it hadn't gone viral, would it get the same treatment, that other poems probably deserve more, that kind of thing. I think it's just a right place, right time. And she was able to kind of spin and riff off of it and, make a really big career for herself, and good for her.
Yeah. I do love that poem that you read in response to Good Bones. I think that it should always be paired with Good Bones, because I think that's an important voice to be heard. And I think a person can like both poems. I think it's not an impossibility to say good poems, good bone. Why do I keep saying poems? I feel like I was like good bones, good bones.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what happened is incredible, because we should always be having conversations, right? So like that these, this poem wasn't written, I don't think, in disrespect to Maggie Smith. I think it was just a response poem to kind of when you see something go viral and you are of a group that, or population, or or it's just not relatable to you, and you can't understand why everybody is like going mad over something, why not? What better than write a response poem that is so poignant and so just heartbreaking and real, raw, and full of those hard truths, like I said earlier, that I think we're all, this is the time. We're of the times where we talk hard truths. We don't want platitudes. Like we don't want these sort of vague notions of hope. Like we want to hear real stories, and we want to deal with them.
When I did a little bit of research on this, I came upon an article by Kelly Russell Ogden, and she explored kind of the phenomenon of viral poems and kind of how or the why of them. And one of the things she pointed out was timing. So this, like you had already discussed, I think this poem came out a few days or even like a day after the Orlando shooting. And so I think there's that timing obviously played a big part in that. I think, and I'm always curious, like if it would have came out at a different time, would people have shared it as much? Like if this was just a very average day in a very average week in a very average month, would this have gone viral? And I don't know. It's always a curious thing. Like what is that kind of a little bit of, you got talent, you got publication, and then you get like just that hint of luck that is going to make it spark. And like it's really interesting to see like where the poem is, where it went, and why, and all that. So I do think that timing was the big key here. And I'm almost curious to know when Maggie Smith actually wrote the poem itself and what was kind of the catalyst for that.
I think everybody is trying to sort of write that anthemic poem that contains all the same qualities that would achieve, the same sense of going viral or whatever. Well, I don't want to come back to Rupi K here.
Rupi K.
And I don't want to belabor a point that I already made, but there was shall we say, poet Twitter personality this week that mentioned that Rupi was performing in her town or their town, and kind of mocked her. And all the, a lot of the poets, of the academic sort of circles, her own echo chamber of getting, the responses that she wanted probably, which is that, ugh, gross, Rupi, blah, 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 so bad, it's not even poetry, this and that. It made me really curious about whether or not if Maggie was taking her Keep Moving, we're also viral. It depends on how you package it, right? Like Rupi is packaging her poems as, or her words as poems. I don't know how Maggie packages Keep Moving, but if she was doing some kind of like auditorium circuit and going and speaking all over the world, which I think the Rupi is doing like a world tour with Maggie's Good Bones, not Good Bones, Keep Moving viral project, get the same treatment as Rupi is, because Maggie has sort of this validation from the literary world that she has not received the same level of distaste for her Keep project than that like Rupi is with her poems that are very similar, affirmations, platitudes, generalizations of the world, broken relationship poems, just things to motivate you and to help people sort of rise out of their, bad experiences. I mean, it's all very the same formula.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because, like you said, I think kind of the message and the themes are fairly similar. I think as far as quality goes, they're pretty on par as far as, at least from most of what I've seen, which is, I haven't read it per se. I haven't read the Keep Moving project, and I haven't read a full Rupi K book, but I've seen bits of both, and I feel like they're pretty solidly like kind of like cousins, if you will. I think the audience is getting the same thing, even though the demographic seems to be different. I would say Rupi's audience, I think, is smaller, not smaller, younger. A bit of a
definitely not smaller.
I mean, yeah, I believe it might be a little bit of a younger crowd. I think there's a lot of teens, a lot of young adults. I think with Maggie Smith's work, I think it's a little older than that, a little more older than young adult, more family aged, if you will. As far as that person of some esteem and clout who is crapping on Rupi K, I think it's such a garbage tweet that they wrote. Refused to even call him a poet, said poem person. And I think that kind of gatekeeping, like elitist crap is nonsense. I hate it. I hate it so much. Like, of course, there are things that I like and don't like, but to call someone who is not a poet and not even refer to them as a poet, just calling them poem person dismissively, mocking what they were wearing in an advertisement. Like, I think Rupi K is running in a very different circle and has a very different image and very different type of handling of her brand than any one of us.
Rupi could definitely be kind of the future of how poetry is ingested. And like I said, we're we have several generations, but you and I are of the generation of, like I said, sort of like one leg in analog, one leg in digital, whereas this other person I think is a little bit older, or I don't know, older, definitely. And it's very, very hard for people to wrap their head around big success stories like Rupi and take their words seriously. And I think, I guess it just kind of comes down to taste.
I wish I knew less about poets, to be honest, like their biographies or their personal thoughts on Rupi K or things like that, because it just makes me not like them as people a lot of times, and that makes me sad. And I think the person who is crapping on Rupi K like has a like spoken word background. I think they've done some spoken word, which is a form that gets shit on by academic poets too. So I'm like, it's strange that now that you've elevated to a certain more like academic tenure kind of position, that you are now shitting on a different form that maybe you don't completely understand or respect. And it just doesn't seem overly generous with that kind of platform. And like, I mean, Rupi is probably a millionaire, so they have a certain kind of privilege and all that. But at the same time, it just, I don't know, like for us, I feel like no matter who we target, we're punching up. Like that's one of the great spots.
The bottom of the barrel.
The bottom of the barrel. But it just feels so ungenerous. And then it gives people permission to also talk shit and make fun of what Rupi K is wearing in this ad. And oh yeah, go and live tweet it. That would be hilarious. Like, I don't think it's that hilarious. Like, fine, make fun of people. Like, kudos to you. Like, all your hundreds of thousands of followers and all these like people that worship you can praise you and kiss your ass, and you can be mean. Like, good job, way to go, internet. I am ready. And since it was my pick, I will say Good Bones by Maggie Smith. I reread it, and it's been a little bit, and I remember first reading it and liking it. I still like it. I think it does hold up. Shockingly, I don't know, it's so hard to be able to hold up against how much kind of hype and swirl surrounds the thing, but I think it did a great job, and I really do think it captures a feeling that will stick with me for a very, very long time. And we can talk about craft elements that work in it, craft elements that might not work in it, but I think what definitely works and sticks and really makes an impact is that general feeling that this poem conveys. And I think it does it so successfully. So I toast Good Bones by Maggie Smith.
Right.
It is just one of those poems that it really does capture this conflict that like I feel I would sell. I want to sell the world to my kids too. Sometimes I just want to be able to lie and say, you know what, like, yeah, it's going to be fine. There's that certain element of like, what is called like toxic positivity, right? Like, oh, this is not that bad. We can make this, this is going to be great. And I get that. And I get that criticism. I also want to toast that other poem that you read too, because I think that's a fucking brilliant response. But I want to toast them both in conjunction as a pair, because I think both are necessary. And I think the conversation, the response makes Good Bones even more interesting as a poem.
I'm going to agree with you on the sense that I do like the poem. I think it's a good poem. This is a really difficult toast or roast, because I feel like that context matters. And so we're talking in the context of viral poems, and this poem's success story. And so as much as I do really like this poem, I like what it's been able to achieve. I am in awe that it got so far as it did, even on TV, and made lots of news articles, and that is so much like such a success story that so many other poems deserve. But I will say, having read it again with a more critical eye, while being timeless and being vague enough to stand the test of time, I do think it alienates just too many people who may not be participating in social media. And that is something that can trick people. I think, social media can trick you into thinking something is really, really great, when in fact there's a lot of silent voices who disagree. And so having read, having read the response poem by Natalie Scenters-Zapico, I felt like I was a little bit slapped in the face, realizing that not everybody has this story, not everybody has the same privilege. I've already said this all, so I'm just gonna have to, say I roast. I roast.
Yeah. I definitely can see the criticisms of this. I think there is a little bit of like self anesthetic quality to it, where it's like you just need an escape for the world. So it's like Good Bones, just inhale that, like I said, like in conjunction with that response poem, I think it makes for one of the most fascinating reads, like pairing those two and really looking at it closely. And like I don't think like you have to hate one to like the other. I think Good Bones is a good poem, and I think the criticism against it is completely valid. So I love that conversation that it brings up. I love that response, and I love a lot of the things that the response does. If I had I'll have to look at the poem more closely, because I'm sure I can cite things specific, but like it definitely is more powerful. Like after having just read Good Bones and then hearing that response, it's like, oh yeah, it all really does make sense, and that's all really good points, and it's fascinating. I would never want to share Good Bones without sharing that response poem.
Next show, we're going to talk about a listener suggested poem, which is from Jory
Mickelson.
Jory.
That's right.
Jory is a Floating Bridge poet, right? Floating Bridge Press poet.
Correct. Yeah, they are the author of Wilderness Kingdom, which won our Evergreen Award tour. It is a fantastic full-length debut from Jory. And so yeah, the next time if someone comments on that video where we discuss the suggested poem, I can definitely send out a copy or two of Jory's book. So
yeah, that would be awesome. And you sent me a copy as well.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so I'm so excited. And Jory suggested several poems. But we'll just pick one out of the list, and maybe we'll go back and pick another. But we're going to talk next time about Caitlin Gildrien's poem, These Violent Delights Have Violent Ends, which first appeared in Rattle, I guess. So that.
All right, let's do it. I haven't read that poem, so I am excited. I don't even think I've heard of the poet. So this will be brand new everything.
I don't even know if I pronounced the name right.
That's its own theme for us, is just us mispronouncing things. So okay, everybody, thank you for being here and listening. Like, subscribe, send us emails, send us money, let us know what poems we should read or poets to interview, like do all those fun things. Tell us, if you want, at tableforDeuce@gmail.com, and we will read your emails and send us nice things or send us mean things, and then we'll read that and mock you on the show. Like whatever you feel like doing.
Or agree with you.
or agree, be like, yeah, you're right, we came across as assholes. It's true, our apologies. So let us know. So once again, tableforDeuce@gmail.com, and we will see you all next time.
All right, keep moving. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say with all that is that
but it's a little bit of a narcotic of a poem. It's just like I just sit back and inject some sweet Maggie Smith and then, just fade away. I don't know what the hell I'm saying anymore.